Nevada Caldwell had an infectious smile that could turn a passenger's sour mood into sweet relief in an instant. She had always prided herself on her ability to handle high-stress situations at 30,000 feet. Through turbulence, medical emergencies, and even the occasional unruly passenger, Nevada had remained a steady beacon of professionalism for nearly a decade. She loved working as a flight attendant and never thought she would want to do anything else. From a young age, she had dreamed of traveling the world, meeting new people, and living a life brimming with adventure. Yet on this particular morning, she had no idea that her routine flight would change the course of her entire career. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. It was early, and the private airstrip was bathed in a subdued glow from the rising sun. The light danced on the wingtips of the sleek silver private jet Nevada had been assigned to. She was relieved at first. In her experience, private charters were more relaxed than commercial flights, and the passengers were usually familiar faces, celebrities, sports stars, or business moguls. Sometimes, these flights felt more like hosting a cozy cocktail party in a luxurious living room thousands of feet in the air. Nevada was excited, not only because she enjoyed these more intimate flights, but also because she had heard rumor of a notable passenger. No one had dropped a name, but the way her supervisor had spoken led her to believe the passenger might be someone with a large public profile. Nevada checked the catering supplies carefully, her breath fogging up the crisp morning air. She ran her fingers through her perfectly knotted bun and ensured every pin was in place. She had a fondness for detail, a trait that had served her well in her career. Each seat cushion had to be immaculate, every glass polished to a flawless sheen, and each dish meticulously arranged. The color palette of the plane's interior was cream and charcoal gray, giving it a modern yet cozy feel. She double-checked that there were enough bottles of water, champagne, and the artisanal juices sometimes demanded by high-profile clientele. Everything looked immaculate, and as the captain gave her a thumbs up from the cockpit, she felt ready to greet whoever was about to board. Her first sign that something was different came just moments before the passenger arrived. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a navy suit approached her on the tarmac. He introduced himself as Carter, a personal assistant for the owner of the plane. Nevada's eyebrows rose slightly. The owner was coming aboard as a passenger? She smiled and nodded, aware that she was dealing with a type of flight she'd had less frequently. The actual owner riding along as opposed to one of their chosen guests or business associates. Carter didn't give away the name of his boss right away, but he did mention the man was quite famous, internationally renowned, and definitely someone whose presence garnered both excitement and attention. Nevada's curiosity piqued, and she asked if she could prepare anything special. Carter waved his hand good-naturedly. "He's easy," he said, though his voice bore the kind of tone that suggested the passenger was used to a certain level of comfort and privacy. "Just treat him like any passenger, he doesn't like fuss." Nevada took that to heart. She found that sometimes the richest or most famous individuals were the ones who yearned for a sense of normalcy. They wanted to be treated kindly, with dignity, but not necessarily fawned over. Still, she kept her guard up because she had also met big names who appreciated an over-the-top experience. The instructions were simple enough: serve the expected refreshments, make sure to address any questions, and ensure the flight was as smooth as possible. The hush of the morning was interrupted by the deep roar of a luxury SUV's engine. It pulled up to the private jet, and the man who stepped out was tall, imposing, with the kind of presence that demanded attention. He wore an unzipped hoodie, track pants, and a pair of high-end sneakers that glinted in the early morning sun. He walked with the athletic grace of someone used to commanding a court or a field. Nevada paused for a second, looking the man up and down, trying to see if she recognized him. Something tickled at the back of her memory. His face was intensely familiar, but she couldn't place it immediately. She greeted him warmly, thinking perhaps he was a professional athlete. She had seen so many come through the private jets for special games or sponsorship tours. Some were gracious and others were less so. He nodded back, polite enough but distracted, as though his mind was on something else, maybe a game, a meeting, or an upcoming event. Nevada's co-worker had said something about a basketball player, and she briefly recalled that one of the biggest in the sport was rumored to have purchased a new plane. She had seen stories in magazines about the purchase. The man in front of her was muscular, tall, and absolutely fit the profile, but she couldn't name him on sight. She had, quite embarrassingly, never been a big basketball fan. She followed tennis, occasionally soccer, but basketball had slipped under her radar. So she smiled, offered him a seat, and told him she'd bring him a drink once they were airborne. He nodded in thanks before moving inside. The corners of his mouth curled faintly as though amused or simply preoccupied. Nevada eyed him one last time. There was something about the shape of his beard, his eyes, and then it hit her that perhaps he was one of those MVP superstars, but she still couldn't conjure the name. It would nag at her until she placed it. She also recalled how Carter had said owner, not just passenger. Her line of reasoning told her this man must indeed be a star of some repute. Yet, as she quietly shut the aircraft door, she told herself not to worry. If he needed anything, he'd surely introduce himself more formally. The engines fired up, and Nevada went through the typical safety procedures. In a normal commercial flight, she'd be front and center with a seatbelt demonstration, oxygen mask instructions, and pointed gestures toward emergency exits. Here, on this sleek private jet, all she had to do was politely remind the passenger where everything was located. It was a quick, personalized version. She'd done it 100 times before, but she still did it with a certain theatrical flair. The man listened attentively, nodding in places, and then sank back into the plush seat. The plane glided into the sky, leaving the hustle of the ground far behind. About 20 minutes into the flight, Nevada prepared to offer the passenger a range of drinks. She entered the cabin area where he was seated, scrolling through his phone. She cleared her throat softly and asked what he might like. He said, "I'll take some water," and nodded politely. His voice was deep and rich, and again something about it struck her as familiar. She grabbed a chilled bottle of premium spring water and placed it in front of him, along with a glass and a cloth napkin. He mumbled, "Thanks," and returned to his phone. She observed that he didn't look tired exactly, but there was a weight in his expression, the kind of tiredness that comes from constant scrutiny and busy schedules. Throughout the next hour, she made occasional checks, offering snacks, checking on the cabin's temperature. He seemed content, occasionally meeting her eyes with a polite nod, but otherwise immersed in his phone calls or messages. The flight was smooth and quiet. Carter, seated a few rows behind, periodically got up to walk around, stretching his legs, but never did he share more info about who exactly his boss was. Nevada began to suspect it must be someone extremely high profile, someone who preferred not to be recognized, or perhaps someone who expected recognition without introduction. Nevada's day took a sharp turn when, an hour and a half into the flight, the man decided to approach her directly. He stood up and walked to the galley, where she was arranging fruit plates. He asked if she had any cold compresses because he felt a bit of tension in his neck. She nodded, rummaged for a moment, and found a small cold pack in the medical kit. As she handed it to him, her eyes caught sight of the ring on his finger, a massive championship ring. Her heart gave a stutter. She'd seen pictures of rings like that before. Suddenly, it all clicked in her head. This was LeBron James. The realization broke over her like a wave, and her cheeks flushed with warmth. Of course it was him, the famous basketball icon. Multiple championships, MVP awards, not to mention the significant brand deals and philanthropic work. Not to mention he was known for traveling in style and had recently been featured in a story about purchasing a top-of-the-line private jet. She froze. She tried to keep her composure. She realized she had unknowingly been rather distant and curt with one of the biggest sports stars on the planet, not out of rudeness, but out of genuine ignorance. The feeling of embarrassment started prickling her skin. She wanted to say something, but felt it might be awkward to gush a belated, "Oh my gosh, you're LeBron James." She simply nodded and handed him the cold pack. His gentle thank you was accompanied by a grateful smile, and he walked back to his seat. Moments later, Carter approached, apparently noticing Nevada's wide eyes. He whispered, "You okay?" She nodded, letting him know that she just realized who was on board. Carter shrugged amicably. "Don't worry about it. He's actually quite down to earth." Nevada felt herself relax a little. Perhaps it was a good thing she hadn't recognized him immediately. At least she hadn't made a fool of herself, fawning over him like a starstruck fan. Maybe her ignorance had come across as polite indifference, which might have been refreshing for someone of his stature. Still, a small needling thought suggested she should at least show some courtesy. She considered apologizing for not realizing who he was, but decided it was better to maintain the professional role and only bring it up if the opportunity presented itself. The flight continued uneventfully for the next hour. Nevada busied herself tidying the cabin, answering LeBron's sporadic requests for water or a snack. She prepared a gourmet sandwich for him at one point, which he praised for its fresh taste. She even made casual conversation about the weather conditions around their destination. As the private jet soared through clear skies, Nevada allowed herself a moment to reflect on the life she'd chosen. Meeting someone like LeBron James was not an everyday occurrence for most people, but in her line of work, crossing paths with icons was part of the job. She just wished she hadn't been so utterly clueless at the outset. In any case, she felt she had handled herself decently, especially given the awkwardness of not knowing. Her big misstep happened as the flight neared its conclusion. LeBron was finishing up a phone call with what sounded like a business associate discussing some real estate investment. Nevada collected his plate from lunch, and when he ended the call, he looked over at her. He was polite as ever, and she took the opening to comment, "So, are you going somewhere special for business, or is this a vacation trip?" She tried to sound casual, though internally she cringed because she knew many celebrities disliked personal questions. LeBron gave a half smile and replied, "Bit of both, actually. I have some meetings, but I'm hoping to enjoy the destination too." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't pry further. She nodded and told him she hoped he would have a pleasant time. She then ventured a compliment. "I really admire basketball players, especially those who manage to stay dedicated over the years. It's such a demanding sport." That was the closest she came to revealing that she'd recognized him. LeBron nodded, seemingly unbothered, but in her attempt to keep things breezy, she made an offhand comment as she was walking away. "You've got a lot of confidence. Some guys bring a whole entourage and act like they run the place, but you seem more normal. That's nice." She meant it as a compliment. Unfortunately, her tone or phrasing must have come off differently. It was as though she was lumping him with other athletes who swaggered with arrogance. LeBron raised an eyebrow. For a fraction of a second, Nevada worried that she had said too much. She tried to salvage it by adding, "I'm just saying, you handle yourself well." But the moment had already passed. She decided to move along, hoping the conversation would slip into memory. However, with just half an hour left in the flight, things spiraled. Nevada was collecting trays and asked him if he needed anything else. He was adjusting his seat and his carry-on bag. She noticed he had a custom luggage tag which indeed had his initials LJ in stylized gold script. As she stowed the tray, she made a light-hearted remark. "Your bag is nice. Must have cost a fortune. Then again, you guys get all that fancy stuff free, I bet." She laughed, trying to lighten the mood. He set his phone down. "What do you mean by you guys?" he asked in a calm, measured tone. She flushed, realizing that once again her attempt at humor had backfired. "Oh no, I don't mean anything by it. People who are famous, or, big sports stars. You get sponsorships, brand deals. That's all I meant." A flicker of irritation passed over his face. She could see his jaw tighten. She quickly recalled stories from other flight attendants about how celebrities sometimes grew weary of assumptions about their wealth, sponsorships, or freebies. Feeling the need to change topics, she offered, "Would you like some dessert before we land? We have a fantastic cheesecake." He exhaled slowly and nodded. "Sure, I'll try the cheesecake." Nevada prepared the dessert with trembling hands, silently cursing her poor phrasing and the sudden awkwardness. When she delivered it, he accepted it politely, though the genial atmosphere from earlier had disappeared. She suspected he'd had enough prying comments about his money and fame to last a lifetime. She made a mental note to keep her mouth shut unless asked a direct question. She retreated to the galley to let him enjoy the cake in peace. The plane landed smoothly on the runway of a coastal city known for its sprawling beaches and luxurious resorts. Nevada began the usual post-flight procedures, instructing the passenger to remain seated until the engines were off and the plane was secured. Once they came to a stop, LeBron stood, carefully picked up his belongings, and gave her a polite nod. "Thanks for the flight," he said, his tone civil but distant. Carter picked up on the tension, it seemed, because he offered Nevada a tight smile. He placed a tip in an envelope and handed it to her discreetly. "Thanks for your service," he said, and ushered LeBron down the steps onto the tarmac. Nevada watched them go, her heart sinking. She had messed up the last impressions with one of the most famous athletes alive, all because she'd made glib assumptions. Once they were gone, she sank into a seat, feeling her legs trembling. The frustration she felt with herself was suffocating. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through the news out of habit, trying to distract herself. That's when a text came in from her friend, another flight attendant who was connected to social media gossip. OMG, just saw you flew with LeBron. Did you get a pic? Nevada wanted to bury her head in her hands. She couldn't even bring herself to respond. She spent the next couple of flights replaying the day in her mind, imagining different ways she could have avoided the awkwardness. Her self-criticism was relentless, but after a few days, she figured it was over. LeBron was a busy man with countless obligations. Surely he'd forget about her. She carried on with life, continuing to do her job diligently and politely. She chalked it up to experience, a lesson in being more careful about assumptions and jokes, especially around high-profile clients. A month slipped by, and Nevada's routine resumed. Early calls, private charters, commercial flights, it was all part of her schedule. Occasionally, her fellow attendants teased her about the day she flew with LeBron, but she kept the details to herself, summarizing it with a casual, "He was cool." She never mentioned her foot-in-mouth moments. She just wanted to move on. Then came another private flight assignment that made her heart race the moment she read the itinerary. It was the same private jet, same tail number. The request for the flight had come in through the airline's charter service again, with the same time block and from the same departure city. No passenger names listed, just an instruction to bring a robust selection of healthy meals and juices, plus top-shelf beverages. She began to suspect that LeBron might be on board again, or at least someone from his circle. This realization made her stomach twist in knots. She feared a repeat of her previous blunders. On the day of the flight, she arrived early, making sure every detail was perfect. She placed a variety of protein shakes, fruit salads, whole grain wraps, and a range of fresh-pressed juices into the galley's fridge. She organized the cabin meticulously. The seats were arranged with fresh blankets and pillows. Her uniform was immaculate. She practiced in the mirror, reminding herself not to say anything that could be misinterpreted. The SUV arrived. Out stepped Carter wearing a sharp suit. He didn't have LeBron with him. Instead, he was accompanied by a couple of other men in sports attire. They looked like trainers or security detail. Nevada's heart pounded. She greeted Carter with a polite smile, and he acknowledged her politely as well. She guided them into the plane. They settled in quickly, chatting among themselves about schedules and appointments. 5 minutes later, a second car arrived. This time it was LeBron, stepping onto the tarmac with confident strides. Unlike last time, he wore a designer bomber jacket over a casual shirt and jeans. He looked a bit more relaxed, but nonetheless focused. He offered Nevada a curt nod as he boarded. She braced herself for that moment he would look her in the eye and maybe remember her. She felt certain he would. After all, how many private flight attendants could there be in rotation for this particular airline? The question was how he would respond to seeing her again. She mustered her warmest professional smile. "Good morning. Welcome aboard," she said. "My name is Nevada, and I'm happy to serve you." He glanced at her name tag, and his eyebrows lifted a fraction. She couldn't tell if he was amused, annoyed, or indifferent. "Morning," he said politely and took his seat near the window. She let out a silent breath of relief. At least he'd responded. Carter stored some personal items in the overhead bin, and moments later the pilot signaled they were ready for takeoff. Nevada performed her safety routine swiftly, with practiced grace. The engines roared, the aircraft soared into the morning sky. For about half an hour, Nevada stayed in the galley prepping the breakfast trays. She could hear chatter among the passengers about upcoming projects, business ventures, and a bit of basketball talk. LeBron's deep baritone occasionally punctuated the conversation. When the time came to serve breakfast, she carefully placed a tray in front of him. She included a bowl of fresh fruit, some scrambled egg whites, turkey bacon, whole wheat toast, and a green juice. "If there's anything else you'd like, just let me know," she said, her tone measured. She prayed she wouldn't slip up like last time. LeBron looked at the tray, gave a nod of thanks, and said, "Looks good." His voice revealed no trace of the tension that lingered after their last encounter. Nevada felt a wave of cautious relief. She proceeded to serve Carter and the others, returning only once to check if everything was satisfactory. They all seemed to be enjoying the meal. Throughout the flight, Nevada was a model of quiet attentiveness. She responded quickly to requests, offered additional beverages at the right times, and ensured trash and used plates were cleared promptly. She kept her interactions minimal unless someone initiated conversation. Hours passed in relative peace. She could sense the difference from the last time. There was no small talk or jokes. Instead, it was purely a business-like environment. As the plane began its descent, LeBron stood up and approached the galley, possibly to stretch his legs. Nevada stood at attention, awaiting any requests. He leaned against the wall, arms folded across his chest regarding her. She felt her pulse quicken, uncertain what he might say. "I remember you," he finally said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "You flew with me a little while back." She swallowed. "Yes, I did." He looked down briefly before continuing. "You seemed uncomfortable at the end of that flight. Everything okay back then?" She hadn't expected him to address it so directly. She scrambled for a calm, professional response. "I was a little worried I might have been rude or said something that offended you," she admitted. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged lightly. "I meet a lot of people. You seemed a bit nervous, but I'm not one to hold grudges, especially over something small." His voice softened as he said this. "We're good." Relief washed over her so completely that she nearly sagged against the galley counter. Instead, she maintained her composure and offered a sincere, "Thank you, I appreciate that." She dared to add, "It won't happen again." He gave a faint smile and nodded. Before he turned to head back to his seat, he asked, "Where'd you get the name Nevada?" It was a small question, one that signaled a shift in the energy. She told him, "My mom was a traveler. She loved the desert states. She thought Nevada sounded unique." He responded with an understanding nod. "It's cool." Then he slid back into his seat, strapping in for the final approach. Nevada exhaled, feeling like she'd just passed a test she had prepared for all month. After landing, LeBron and his team disembarked. Carter offered the usual envelope to Nevada, along with a more genuine grin this time. The warmth in his expression told her that the flight must have gone well. She thanked them, and as LeBron stepped out, he gave her a short wave. She watched him disappear into the black SUV, feeling a profound sense of redemption. That could have been the end of it, a neat story of a second chance gone well. But fate had bigger plans. A few weeks later, Nevada was stunned to learn through an internal memo that a new flight attendant position had opened on the personal staff of an undisclosed high-profile client. This was separate from her usual rotation. The airline provided specialized staffing for certain VIP owners who wanted consistent service from a familiar face. The rumor mill said it was for a well-known athlete who traveled frequently, perhaps even internationally during the off-season. Nevada's heart hammered when she realized it could be LeBron James. Part of her craved that prestigious position, while another part felt intimidated by the possibility of constant scrutiny in such a high-expectation environment. When her supervisor called her into the office, she prepared herself for any news. Good or bad, she sat down, smoothing her navy blue skirt nervously. Her supervisor, a polished woman named Patricia, folded her hands on the desk and announced, "We've received a request to fill a dedicated flight attendant spot. The client specifically asked if you would be interested. I believe you flew with him a couple of times. LeBron James?" Nevada almost dropped the file she was holding. She stammered out a response, trying to contain her astonishment. "He asked for me?" Patricia nodded. "Yes, apparently you made a positive impression. He wants someone who's professional but also real, not obsequious. Of course, if you accept, you'll be traveling quite a bit on shorter notice. You'll also likely be on standby for his schedule changes. But the compensation package is generous." Nevada's mind whirled. The last thing she had expected was to have made a positive impression, especially after her awkward missteps on their first flight. Yet the second flight must have overshadowed the initial fiasco. She thought about the chance to travel widely, the pay, and the experience. It was in many ways the dream scenario. She nodded slowly. "I'd be honored to accept," she said. Patricia smiled. "Wonderful. We'll move forward and I'll send over the details. You'll be assigned to him exclusively. The official start date is in 2 weeks." After she left Patricia's office, Nevada allowed herself a moment of excitement. She texted her close friends the news, though she kept some details vague. Inside, she felt a heady mix of gratitude and awe. She'd gone from embarrassing herself in front of one of the biggest sports icons in the world to being chosen as his personal flight attendant. Life was unpredictable indeed. The following weeks passed in a blur of training and preparatory tasks. She was introduced to LeBron's personal chef, nutritionist, and the rest of his traveling team. She learned about his dietary preferences, daily schedule, and the usual flight routes. She also signed confidentiality agreements. Soon the day arrived for her first flight in this new role. She wore a freshly tailored uniform and stood on the tarmac with a calm confidence that belied her nervous heart. The new plane was even more lavish, clearly updated with personal touches, family pictures, a small lounge area, and a conference table for business meetings. Nevada felt a sense of pride as she took in the surroundings, anticipating how she would keep everything in pristine order. When LeBron arrived, he was on a call but gave her a cordial nod and a quick, "Hi, Nevada," before stepping inside. Carter was right behind him, dropping a duffel bag that Nevada offered to store. She could tell this dynamic was more relaxed than the typical private flight. The plane belonged to LeBron fully, and everyone on board was part of his inner circle. She was the newcomer, but she was also an officially requested member of this entourage. During the flight, she provided the same unwavering professionalism. She offered new fresh-pressed juices, set out lunch when requested, and maintained a discreet presence unless called upon. She overheard talk about upcoming philanthropic events, brand collaborations, and details of off-season training. Though curiosity bubbled within her, she respected the line between personal and professional. After a few flights, the group seemed at ease with her. They teased her gently, asked her about her life, and even included her in the occasional group laughter. LeBron, for his part, opened up just a little bit, making small talk about her background and her love of travel. She learned he was deeply committed to various community initiatives. She admired his passion for giving back, and he seemed to appreciate her genuine interest without the starstruck exclamations he might be used to. Their working relationship found its rhythm, and Nevada excelled in her role. Then came a flight to Europe that promised nearly 10 hours in the air, long enough that she'd be serving multiple meals and perhaps even assisting with personal requests. On that flight, LeBron seemed more reflective, looking out of the window for long stretches. Eventually, he approached Nevada in the lounge area and asked if she wanted to join him for a quick break, maybe take a seat and chat while the co-pilot kept watch on any service needs. Surprised, but pleased, she agreed, and sat across from him in the plush chairs by a small table. He was candid about how life had changed for him over the years, going from a high school phenom to a worldwide icon. He spoke of the pressures, the expectations, the times he felt misunderstood or pigeonholed by the public. She listened, occasionally offering sympathetic nods. At one point, he mentioned how some people see only the wealth and endorsements, and not the grueling work or the sacrifices. Nevada recalled her own missteps in making assumptions about freebies and sponsorships. It felt surreal to hear him speak candidly about the very topic that had caused her blunder months ago. Eventually, she worked up the courage to say, "I'm really sorry if I ever contributed to that misunderstanding. I genuinely didn't know who you were on that first flight, and I said some pretty ignorant things." He paused and then waved his hand dismissively. "All good. I guess it was refreshing in a way. People usually either know exactly who I am or they pretend they don't, but you really didn't. It kept things real." He shrugged with a grin. "And hey, you're here now, so obviously no hard feelings." She felt a surge of gratitude that radiated warmth through her entire body. For the next hour, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: music, travel stories, and funny anecdotes from her years in the air. LeBron shared a few highlights of his career, but mostly kept the focus on day-to-day joys and occasional frustrations. By the time Nevada excused herself to bring everyone dinner, she realized she was no longer anxious around him. She saw him less as an untouchable icon and more as a professional athlete who loved his work, his family, and the life he had built. The flight soared over the Atlantic, with lights dimmed for those trying to sleep. Nevada returned to the galley to prepare the last round of drinks before rest time. She looked out the tiny window at the infinite sky, stars shimmering in the dark expanse. In that moment, She reflected on the wild journey that had brought her here. She'd made a slip, several actually, when she first encountered LeBron James. But those mistakes had somehow led to an opportunity she could never have dreamed of: becoming a trusted flight attendant for one of the greatest basketball legends of all time. Their story was not defined by that initial insult, that moment she inadvertently implied he was just another arrogant superstar. Instead, it was defined by the growth that happened afterward. How a small misunderstanding blossomed into an enduring professional partnership and mutual respect. When the next day's flight came, and Nevada once again welcomed LeBron aboard, the smile they exchanged spoke to how far they had journeyed together. Far beyond first impressions, well into the territory of genuine human connection. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what do you think will happen when LeBron reveals he owns the plane? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.